The sky above the federal prison in the desolate Midwest of America hung heavy and gray, like a slab of cold steel pressing down on the world below. Weak sunlight barely filtered through the narrow slits in the towering concrete walls, casting faint streaks across the dank corridors that reeked of sweat and rust. A shrill siren sliced through the air, signaling the hour, its echo mingling with distant shouts from inmates gathered in the inner yard. This wasn't a place for rehabilitation. It was a crucible, a kill-or-be-killed arena where the weak were crushed and power belonged to those ruthless enough to claim it. Isaiah Ghost Coleman sat alone in the corner of the mess hall, a solitary figure amid the chaos of clanging trays and rough voices. He was a tall black man, broad-shouldered and lean, with a stillness that carried an unspoken threat. His sharp eyes, glinting like honed blades, scanned the room without haste. In his sleeve, he concealed a small, jagged shard of metal, something he'd pried from the rusted frame of his cell bunk and sharpened against the concrete floor over sleepless nights. No one here knew that he'd once been a legendary Delta Force commander, codenamed Ghost for his ability to slip through the deadliest missions unseen, from the scorching deserts of Afghanistan to the blood-soaked alleys of Mosul. Now, trapped in this steel cage, his gaze remained unyielding. The other inmates whispered about him, keeping their distance as if sensing an invisible storm brewing. "That dude's bad news," one muttered, his voice gravelly from smuggled smokes. "You feel it when he looks at you." Isaiah ignored them. He'd grown used to stares long ago, back when he led his squad through hellholes where every shadow hid a threat. Here he had no rifle, no team, just his wits and the cold shard pressed against his wrist. Then they came. The Iron Vipers, the prison's reigning gang, marked by crude viper tattoos coiling up their arms and necks, strode in from the main entrance, their boots thudding against the grimy tiles. Leading them was Travis Blade Decker, a wiry, sharp-eyed thug with a predator's grin and a mind as cunning as it was cruel. His prison jumpsuit hung loose, torn at the sleeves, but his swagger screamed control, the kind earned through fear and blood. 6 of his crew flanked him, each radiating a raw, feral energy, ready to tear apart anyone dumb enough to cross their path. Blade stopped at Isaiah's table, eyeing the tray-cold mashed potatoes and a stale chunk of bread with disdain. Without a word, he snatched the bread, tossed it to the floor, and ground it under his heel, the crunch echoing like a gunshot in the tense silence. "New guy thinks he owns the place, huh?" Blade sneered, his voice thick with street grit, cutting like a switchblade. "Time to teach him who runs this joint." The room went dead quiet, every eye locked on Isaiah. He rose slowly, deliberate, his calm almost unnerving. Those razor-sharp eyes met Blade's, unblinking, sizing him up like prey before the kill. "You're carving your own tombstone," Isaiah said, his voice low and steady, each word loaded with quiet menace. Blade's grin twisted into a snarl. "You're a nobody in here, punk!" He snapped his fingers, and a hulking goon lunged, swinging a meaty fist at Isaiah's face. But Isaiah was faster. He sidestepped in a flash, grabbed the man's collar, and yanked him down hard. The thug's face slammed into the table's edge with a sickening thud, and he crumpled, groaning. Isaiah leaned in close, his voice a whisper only the fallen man could hear. "That one's on the house." The groan cut through the stillness, snapping the crowd out of their trance. Blade took a half step back, his eyes narrowing as if reassessing the threat. He barked, "You think you're hot stuff? This ain't some war zone, soldier boy." Isaiah straightened, the shard slipping into his palm, ready if needed. "You're right," he replied, his tone ice cold. "It's uglier. And I'm still here." Inside, Isaiah's mind churned, not with fear, but with a fire had kept banked since they threw him in this hole. He remembered nights in Fallujah, the air thick with smoke, leading his team through streets where every sound spelled death. "I've walked through worse than this," he thought. "These clowns are just loud." But he knew this wasn't a random scrap Blade, and his Vipers moved with purpose, like dogs on a leash, and someone out there was holding the other end. This wasn't just a fight. It was the opening shot in a war he hadn't started but damn well intended to finish. A distant siren blared, breaking the standoff. Blade stepped back, his smirk promising worse to come. "Eat up, soldier boy," he spat, turning away with his crew. "Next time, you're mine." Isaiah sat back down, eyes still piercing, fingers tightening around the shard. He wasn't just facing a gang, he was up against something bigger, lurking in the shadows. And he'd dig it out, no matter the cost. The air in the federal prison grew heavier after that first clash in the mess hall, like the calm before a storm ready to rip everything apart. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow on the cracked concrete walls, their hum a constant reminder of the cage Isaiah Ghost Coleman was trapped in. He moved through the corridors with purpose, eyes scanning every shadow, every face. The Iron Vipers hadn't backed off, not that he'd expected them to. Men like Travis Blade Decker didn't let a bruised ego slide. They doubled down, and Isaiah could feel their eyes on him, waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment came faster than he'd hoped. By the next morning, the Vipers had turned up the heat. It started small. His bunk was trashed when he returned from the yard, the thin mattress slashed open, stuffing spilling out like guts from a wound. A message scratched into the metal frame read, "Count your days, Ghost." He ran his fingers over the jagged letters, his jaw tightening. Cute, he muttered, but inside his mind was already working, piecing together the pattern. This wasn't just harassment, it was calculated, a slow burn to wear him down. In the mess hall, they cut his rations. A wiry viper with a viper tattoo curling up his neck accidentally knocked his tray to the floor, sneering, "Oops, guess you're fasting today, soldier boy." Isaiah didn't flinch, just stared the guy down until he shuffled off, unease flickering in his eyes. Later, in the shower block, two of them shadowed him, their footsteps echoing on the wet tiles. But they didn't make a move, not yet. At night, the taunts came through the bars. "Sleep tight, Ghost," a voice hissed from the dark. "You're dead by dawn." Metal clanged as someone rattled his cell door, a sharp, grating sound meant to keep him on edge. Isaiah sat on the edge of his bunk, the shard of metal, his makeshift blade, resting in his palm. He didn't sleep much, he didn't need to. Years in Delta Force had taught him how to function on fumes, how to turn exhaustion into fuel. "They're testing me," he thought, tracing the shard's edge with his thumb. "Good, let them think I'm breaking." His mind churned like a war machine, analyzing every move the Vipers made. Blade wasn't just some prison thug flexing muscle. He was too deliberate, too coordinated. This isn't about territory, Isaiah realized. It's a job. Someone's paying him to bury me. The thought lit a fire in his gut, but he kept it buried deep, his face a mask of stone. He'd faced worse than this: ambushes in Kandahar, where every step could be his last, nights pinned down by sniper fire with no backup in sight. "I didn't survive that to fold here," he told himself, gripping the shard tighter. "They want me rattled? I'll rattle them back." Blade made his next play during yard time. The sun beat down on the cracked asphalt, heat shimmering in waves as inmates milled around, their chatter a low drone. Isaiah stood near the fence, watching, waiting. The Vipers approached, 5 of them this time, Blade at the front with that same predator's grin. He spun a small, rusted pipe in his hand, something smuggled in, no doubt a perk of the prison's under-the-table deals. "You're a tough nut, Ghost," Blade said, his voice dripping with mock respect. "But tough nuts crack. How long you think you'll last?" Isaiah didn't move, his stance loose but ready, eyes locked on Blade's. "Longer than you," he replied, calm and cutting. "You're sloppy." "That pipe's your best shot?" Blade's grin faltered, just for a split second, before he laughed a harsh, grating sound. "Big talk for a dead man. We're gonna carve you up slow, soldier boy. Make it a show." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "No one's coming for you. No team, no cavalry, just you and us." Isaiah's pulse stayed steady, but his mind raced. "He's too confident," he thought. "That's not just bravado, he's got a paycheck riding on this." He tilted his head slightly, voice low and lethal. "You're a dog on a leash, Blade. Who's holding it?" The question hit a nerve. Blade's eyes flashed with something anger, maybe fear, before he masked it with a snarl. "You'll find out when you're bleeding out," he spat, nodding to his crew. They fanned out, circling like wolves, but the yard whistle blew before they could close in a guard's lazy signal to wrap it up. Blade smirked, backing off. "Tick-tock, Ghost. Time's running out." As they dispersed, Isaiah stayed put, the shards weighed a cold comfort in his sleeve. The Vipers weren't just a gang, they were hired muscle, and Blade's slip confirmed it. Someone wanted him gone. Someone with enough juice to pull strings in a hellhole like this. They think I'm prey, he thought, a faint, dangerous smile tugging at his lips. Fine. I'll play the game, then flip the board. The siren wailed again, calling them back inside. Isaiah moved with the crowd, his senses sharp, every step deliberate. This wasn't survival anymore, it was war. In wars, he knew how to win. The visitation room smelled of disinfectant and despair, a stark contrast to the grime of the prison's main block. Isaiah Ghost Coleman sat on a hard plastic chair, the scratched plexiglass partition in front of him reflecting the dim fluorescent light overhead. His wrists were cuffed standard procedure, but his posture remained steady, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the door across the glass. The Iron Viper's campaign had left its mark. A faint bruise shadowed his jaw from the shower block scuffle, and the weight of the sleepless nights pressed against his temples. But his gaze didn't waver. He'd survived worse night raids in Mosul with bullets singing past his head, and he wasn't about to crack now. The door creaked open, and Tara Evans stepped in, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. She was a lean woman in her late 30s, dressed in a crisp blazer, her dark hair pulled back tight. A lawyer with a reputation for bulldog tenacity, Tara had been Isaiah's rock since high school, the one who'd stuck by him when the system turned its back. She carried a leather satchel slung over her shoulder, but her face betrayed her leans of worry etched deeper than usual, her sharp brown eyes flickering with urgency as she sat down and leaned toward the small metal speaker. Isaiah, she said, her voice low but clipped, cutting through the hum of the room. Your case is a damn mess. I've been digging, and it's worse than we thought. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the narrow ledge, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. How bad, Tara? She exhaled hard, glancing at the guard near the door before dropping her tone further. Bad enough that someone's gone to a lot of trouble to bury you. The evidence against you, the pipeline sabotage? It's fabricated. Planted drugs in your truck, fake witness statements, timestamps that don't line up. I've got proof it's a setup, but every time I push, doors slam shut. Someone's blocking me, and they're good. Isaiah's jaw tightened, the bruise on his face pulsing faintly with the clench. The Vipers aren't just punks flexing muscle, he said, his words measured but heavy. They're hunting me, Tara. Day and night trashed bunk, cut rations, tails in the showers, Blades running it like a damn op. Someone's paying him to make sure I don't walk out of here. Tara's eyes widened for a split second, then narrowed with resolve. She pressed her palm against the glass, a futile gesture of connection. You're saying this goes beyond the yard? That the gang's a hired hit? Damn right, he replied, his voice dropping to a near growl. They're too tight, too focused. Blade's not smart enough to run this solo. He's got a leash, and it's tied to whoever framed me. You need to find that name, Tara. Fast. A weekend here's a lifetime, and I'm running out of hours. Her fingers curled into a fist against the glass, her voice hardening with a mix of fear and defiance. You're not dying in this hellhole, Isaiah. It'll burn the whole system down before I let that happen. But I need time. Judges don't move quick, and whoever's behind this has deep pockets. Time's a luxury I don't have, he shot back, his tone sharp but controlled. They're not waiting for your paperwork. Blade's got a pipe he shouldn't have smuggled in, no question. This place is rotten, and I'm the one they want to clean up. Dig faster, or I'm a ghost for real. Tara's lips pressed into a thin line, her mind racing behind those steady eyes. She pulled a notepad from her satchel, scribbling something quick, then met his gaze again. There's a name popping up in the files, Nathaniel Pierce. Oil tycoon, big player in energy contracts. Ring any bells? Isaiah's breath caught, a flicker of recognition sparking in his chest. Pierce. 2 years back, he'd crossed paths with the bastard consulted pro bono for a small town fighting Pierce's illegal oil expansion. Helped them win a lawsuit that cost him millions. Yeah, he said, voice low and cold. I cost him a fortune. Shut down his pipeline scam. He's got the cash and the grudge to pull this off. Thought so, Tara said, nodding. I'll chase it, bank records, witness payoffs, anything tying him to this. But if Pierce is the one, he's got reach. Cops, lawyers, maybe even here. She hesitated, then added, "Stay sharp, Isaiah. You're tougher than anyone I know." But this isn't just fists, it's a machine. Inside, Isaiah felt the weight of it all pressing down, a familiar pressure from his Delta days when every mission teetered on a razor's edge. She's my lifeline, he thought. But even lifelines fray under this kind of pull. He remembered Pierce's smug face in a courtroom photo, the kind of man who thought money could bury any problem. He thinks I'm a loose end, Isaiah mused, a dark resolve hardening in his gut. It'll show him loose ends cut back. He pressed his hand against the glass, mirroring hers, his voice steady but fierce. "Find the proof, Tara. I'll hold the line here. But when I get out, Pierce pays every damn cent of it." The guard banged his baton on the wall. "Time's up." Tara stood, her eyes locked on his, a silent promise in them. "I'm on it," she said, voice firm. "You don't break, Isaiah. You never have." He nodded faintly as she left, the door clanging shut behind her. Alone again, the cuffs bit into his wrists, but his mind was clear. The Vipers were closing in, Pierce's shadow loomed large, and the clock was ticking. They want a war, he thought, sliding the shard back into his sleeve. It'll give them one they can't win. The prison's labor corridor was a narrow, dimly lit gauntlet of chipped concrete and stacked crates, the air thick with the stench of oil and dust. It was late afternoon, the time when inmates shuffled through mandatory work shifts under the lax eyes of guards who cared more about their next smoke break than the chaos brewing beneath their noses. Isaiah Ghost Coleman moved through the space with deliberate steps, a crate of rusted tools balanced on his shoulder. His sharp eyes darted to every corner, every flicker of movement. Tara's words from the visitation room echoed in his head. Nathaniel Pierce. The name was a live wire in his mind, sparking memories of a smug oil tycoon who'd lost millions because of him. Now, the Iron Vipers were Pierce's hounds, and they were closing in. Isaiah felt it before he heard it, a shift in the air, a sudden hush among the other inmates hauling crates nearby. Then came the sound, heavy boots scuffing the floor, a low chuckle cutting through the hum of the corridor. He didn't turn around, not yet. They're done playing, he thought, shifting the crate slightly to free his right hand. The shard of metal, his only weapon, was tucked tight in his sleeve, its cold edge a grim reassurance against his wrist. The attack came fast. 6 Vipers emerged from the shadows of the stacked crates, their Viper tattoos glinting under the flickering lights. Travis Blade Decker led them, his wiry frame coiled with menace, a rusted pipe smuggled through the prison's crooked underbelly spinning lazily in his hand. "Time's up, Ghost," he sneered, his voice a jagged blade of its own. "You're done dancing." Isaiah dropped the crate with a crash, spinning to face them just as the first Viper lunged, a wiry thug with a sharpened toothbrush aimed at his ribs. Ghost sidestepped, the makeshift blade grazing his jumpsuit, and drove his elbow into the man's throat. The thug choked, stumbling back, but there was no time to finish him. 2 more were on him, fists flying. Isaiah blocked a wild punch with his forearm, the impact jarring his bones, then swung the shard in a quick arc, slicing across the second attacker's arm. The man yelped, clutching the shallow cut, but the third Viper tackled him low, slamming him into a crate. Wood splintered as Isaiah hit the ground, the breath knocked out of him. Pain flared in his side-bruised ribs from the yard scrap, but he rolled, kicking the tackler's knee with a sickening crunch. The man howled, collapsing, and Isaiah scrambled to his feet, chest heaving. 4 down, he calculated, eyes darting to Blade, who hung back, watching with that predator's grin. He's letting them soften me up. The remaining 2 Vipers charged together, one swinging a fist, the other clutching a jagged piece of metal torn from some tool. Isaiah ducked the punch, grabbed the first man's arm, and twisted it hard, using his momentum to hurl him into the second. They crashed into the crates, a tangle of limbs and curses, but Blade stepped forward now, pipe raised. "You're good, soldier boy," he said, his tone mocking but edged with something darker. "But good don't cut it here." Blade swung the pipe fast, aiming for Isaiah's skull. Ghost threw himself to the side, the metal whistling past his ear, clipping his shoulder with a dull thud. Pain shot through him, but he gritted his teeth, lunging forward to close the distance. He grabbed Blade's wrist, twisting it until the pipe clattered to the floor, then drove a knee into the thug's gut. Blade doubled over, gasping, but lashed out with a wild elbow, catching Isaiah's jaw. The world spun for a heartbeat, blood pooling in his mouth, and Blade shoved him back, snarling, "You're nothing, Ghost, just meat waiting to bleed." Isaiah staggered but didn't fall, spitting blood onto the concrete. "Keep talking," he growled, voice low and lethal. "Makes it easier to end you." He lunged again, shard flashing, aiming for Blade's thigh, a warning cut, not a kill. Blade roared, dodging just enough that the metal grazed his leg, tearing fabric but not flesh. Before Isaiah could press the advantage, a sharp whistle pierced the air. "Break it up," a voice barked. Frank Reese, the guard who'd pulled Isaiah out of the yard scuffle, stormed into the corridor, baton raised. His broad frame filled the space, his dark eyes scanning the wreckage crates splintered, vipers groaning on the floor, Blade clutching his torn jumpsuit. "What the hell's this?" he snapped, but his gaze lingered on Blade a fraction too long, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. Isaiah wiped blood from his lip, breathing hard but steady, his mind racing. That look, he thought. Frank's in on it or scared of it. He met the guard's eyes, voice rough but firm. "Ask your boy here." He started it. Blade straightened, smirking despite the limp. "Just a little fun, boss," he said, his tone dripping with insolence. Ghost tripped. Frank's jaw tightened, his hand trembling slightly on the baton. "Back to your cells, all of you," he ordered, voice gruff. Now the vipers limped off, Blade throwing a final glare over his shoulder. "This ain't over, soldier boy." Frank pulled Isaiah aside as the others cleared out, his grip firm but unsteady. "You're stirring hell, Ghost," he muttered, eyes darting nervously. "I owe you from Kabul, but you're going to get us both killed." Isaiah studied him, the shard still warm in his sleeve. Loyalty doesn't shake like that, he thought, suspicion hardening into certainty. He's hiding something. Out loud, he said, "Then watch my back closer, Frank. They're not stopping." Frank nodded curtly and turned away, but Isaiah caught the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand lingered near his radio. The vipers weren't done, and neither was Pierce. This wasn't just a beating, it was a warning, and Ghost wasn't about to heed it. "They want me broken," he thought, spitting blood again as he headed back to his cell. "They'll learn I don't break. I bend steel." The cell block echoed with the clatter of metal doors and the low hum of restless voices as night settled over the prison. Isaiah Ghost Coleman sat on the edge of his bunk, the dim light from a flickering bulb casting shadows across his bruised face. His ribs ached from the labor corridor beating, a dull throb with every breath, and the taste of blood lingered in his mouth. The shard of metal, his lifeline, rested in his hand, its edge glinting faintly as he turned it over, replaying the fight in his mind. The vipers had come hard, but Blade's smirk and Frank's shaky hands stuck with him more than the blows. "This isn't just a gang," he thought, tracing the shard's curve. "It's a hit squad, and Pierce is signing the checks." He couldn't wait for Tara to unravel. The frame job time was bleeding out fast. The vipers wouldn't stop until he was a corpse on a slab, and Frank's wavering loyalty was a wild card he couldn't count on. "I need leverage," Isaiah decided, his Delta Force instincts kicking in. A lone wolf dies quick in a pack fight. Time to even the odds. The next morning, he found his target in the yard. The sun hung low, casting long shadows over the cracked asphalt as inmates milled around some lifting weights, others trading contraband in hushed tones. Isaiah's eyes locked on Javier Sparks Morales, leader of the Lobos crew, a smaller gang dwarfed by the Viper's reign. Sparks was a wiry Mexican-American in his early 40s, sharp-eyed and lean, with a faded tattoo of a wolf's head on his forearm. Before prison, had been an electrical engineer, smart, resourceful, and stuck here after a job gone wrong. He leaned against the fence, watching the yard with a quiet intensity that matched Isaiah's own. Ghost approached, his steps measured, hands loose but ready. Sparks glanced up, his dark eyes narrowing as he sized him up. "Heard you're the Viper's new chew toy," Sparks said, his voice low and dry, tinged with a faint accent. "You look like hell, man." Isaiah stopped a few feet away, meeting Sparks' gaze without blinking. Hell's my playground, he replied, his tone steady and edged. Blade's got the yard locked down, bleeding you dry. I'm guessing you're tired of eating his scraps. Sparks smirked, a flicker of interest sparking in his eyes. You're bold, Ghost. Or stupid. What's your angle? No angle, Isaiah said, stepping closer, voice dropping. A deal. Blade's a tumor, cut him out, and the yard's yours. I've got the moves, but I need numbers. Back me up, and we both win. Sparks tilted his head, studying him like a chess player eyeing a risky gambit. You're a dead man walking, amigo, he said, his tone testing. Vipers outnumber us 3-1. Why should I bet on a corpse? Because I don't lose, Isaiah shot back, his voice hard but calm. I took down 3 of them yesterday with nothing but this. He lifted his sleeve just enough to flash the shard, then tucked it away. Give me your crew and he'll bury Blade. You get the throne, I get breathing room. Simple. Inside Isaiah's mind was a steel trap, weighing every word. He's sharp, he thought. Hellbite if the prize outweighs the risk, but trust here is a loaded gun. Oh, aim it, not hand it over. He'd learned in Delta that alliances were tools, not friendships. Sparks could be an asset, but he'd watch his back. Sparks crossed his arms, silent for a beat, then let out a low chuckle. You're loco, Ghost. I like that. Blade's been choking us out, contraband cuts, yard time, you name it. I'd love to see him bleed. His smile faded, eyes turning cold. But if you screw this, I'm not dying for you. Deals in one wrong move, you're solo. Isaiah nodded, a faint, dangerous glint in his eyes. Fair enough. We hit them where they're sloppy labor block. End of shift. They've got smuggled gear. We'll turn it on them. You in? Sparks extended a hand, his grip firm but guarded when Isaiah took it. In, he said. But you're the tip of the spear, Ghost. Don't dull out, never do, Isaiah replied, releasing the handshake. Get your boys ready. Tomorrow, we move. As Sparks walked off, rallying his crew with a subtle nod, Isaiah lingered by the fence, the shards weighed a cold anchor in his sleeve. Allies here are snakes with a handshake, he thought, his mind already mapping the strike. I'll use them, but on my own backup. Blade's pipe, the Viper's numbers, Frank's twitchy nerves, it all pointed to Pierce pulling strings from the outside. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about flipping the game. The yard whistle blew, signaling the end of rec time. Isaiah moved with the crowd, his bruised ribs protesting, but his resolve ironclad. Tara was digging for proof, but he'd carve his own way out, starting with Blade's blood on the floor. They think I'm cornered, he mused, a grim smile tugging at his lips. They'll learn I don't corner. I hunt. The labor block was a maze of shadows and steel. By the time the afternoon shift wound down, the air thick with the tang of rust and sweat. Crates of salvaged tools and scrap metal lined the narrow corridor, their edges casting jagged silhouettes under the flickering fluorescent lights. The guards had thinned out, most clocking off early, some paid to look the other way, leaving the space ripe for chaos. Isaiah Ghost Coleman stood near a stack of crates, his bruised ribs aching, but his focus razor sharp. The shard of metal gleamed faintly in his grip, a silent promise of what was coming. Today wasn't about surviving, it was about breaking the Iron Viper's spine. Javier Sparks Morales and his Lobos crew fanned out behind him, 5 men in total, each carrying makeshift weapons sharpened plastic, a broken chair leg, a length of chain snatched from the tool pile. Sparks caught Isaiah's eye, nodding once, his lean frame tense but steady. Your show, Ghost, he muttered, voice low and clipped. Make it count. Isaiah's response was a curt nod, his mind already mapping the terrain. They'll come heavy, he thought, scanning the corridor's choke points. Blade's cocky thinks numbers win. That's his mistake. He'd fought outnumbered before, since swept firefights in Helmand, where every move was life or death, and he knew the Viper's arrogance was a crack he could split wide open. The trap sprang shut minutes later. The Vipers stormed in from the far end of the block, 8 of them, their boots pounding the concrete like a war drum. Travis Blade Decker led the charge, his wiry frame bristling with fury, the smuggled pipe swinging in his hand. His Viper tattoo seemed to writhe under the lights as he grinned, a feral edge to it. End of the line, Ghost, he bellowed, his voice echoing off the walls. You and your mutts are done. Isaiah didn't flinch, his stance loose but coiled. Shard ready. Talks cheap, Blade, he shot back, voice cold and cutting. Bring it. The Vipers charged, a wave of muscle and malice. Sparks in the Lobos met them head-on, chain clashed against fist. Plastic stabbed at flesh, but Isaiah zeroed in on Blade. A hulking Viper swung at him first, fists like sledgehammers. Ghost ducked, the blow grazing his ear, and drove the shard into the man's thigh knot deep, just enough to drop him howling. Another came from the side, a wiry thug with a jagged tool shard of his own. Isaiah blocked with his forearm, pain flaring as metal scraped skin, then slammed his elbow into the man's nose. Cartilage crunched, blood sprayed, and the thug crumpled. Around him, chaos reigned. Sparks wrestled a Viper to the ground, chain wrapped around the man's neck, while another Lobo took a fist to the jaw, staggering but swinging back. The corridor rang with grunts and curses, crates toppling as bodies crashed into them. Isaiah pushed through, eyes locked on Blade, who hung back, barking orders like a twisted general. He's waiting me out, Ghost thought, wiping sweat from his brow. Thinks he'll tire, wrong play. Blade finally moved, pipe raised, his grin widening as he closed the gap. You're good, soldier boy, he sneered, swinging hard for Isaiah's skull. But good's dead. Ghost sidestepped, the pipe slamming into a crate with a splintering crack, and lunged, tackling Blade low. They hit the ground hard, concrete biting into Isaiah's knees, and rolled, grappling for control. Blade's pipe skidded away, but he fought, dirty clawing at Isaiah's face, landing a sharp elbow to his bruised ribs. Pain exploded, white hot, but Ghost gritted his teeth, pinning Blade's arm and pressing the shard to his throat. Who's paying you? Isaiah growled, voice a low rumble, the shard drawing a thin line of blood. Talk, or this goes deeper, Blade thrashed, his grin twisting into a snarl, but the fight was leaking out of him. You're screwed anyway, he spat, eyes wild. Pierce, Nathaniel Pierce, he wants you gone, Ghost. You're a dead man. Isaiah's grip tightened, the name igniting a fire in his chest. Pierce, he thought, the oil tycoon's smug face flashing in his mind. As the puppet master, he pressed harder, the shard biting just enough to make Blade gasp. Where's he hitting next? Tell me! Before Blade could answer, a shadow loomed behind a Viper, bloodied but standing, swinging a broken crate plank. Isaiah rolled off Blade just as the wood crashed down, grazing his shoulder with a bruising thud. He sprang up, shard slashing across the attacker's arm, sending him reeling, but the distraction gave Blade a breath. The Viper boss scrambled to his feet, clutching his throat, and bolted for the corridor's end, shouting, Finish him! The remaining Vipers 3 still standing rallied, but Sparks and the Lobos pressed back, chain and fists flying. Isaiah dodged a wild punch, drove his knee into a Viper's gut, and turned just in time to see Blade vanish around a corner. Coward, he muttered, spitting blood onto the floor. The fight wasn't over. Two Vipers lunged together, pinning him against a crate. He twisted, shard slashing one across the hand, then headbutted the other, stars bursting in his vision as the man dropped. A sharp whistle cut through the chaos. Franklin Frank Reese burst in, baton raised, his broad frame shoving through the wreckage. Break it up, he roared, slamming the baton against a crate. His dark eyes swept the scene. Lobos and Vipers sprawled, blood streaking the concrete. Isaiah breathing hard but upright. What the hell's going on? Isaiah straightened, wiping blood from his split lip, his gaze piercing Frank's. Ask Blade, he said, voice rough but steady. He ran like a rat. Check his leash, Pierce owns it. Frank's hand twitched on the baton, a flicker of unease crossing his face before he masked it. Everyone sells now, he barked, but his eyes lingered on Isaiah, tense and searching. The Vipers limped off, the Lobos pulling back with nods of grim respect. Sparks muttering, You're loco, Ghost, but you deliver. Isaiah stayed put for a moment, shard tucked away, his chest heaving. Pierce, he thought, the name of Blade in his mind. He's scared enough to sick dogs on me. Good. Coming for him. Blade's confession was a crack in the wall, and Frank's flinch was another. Heads in deep, Isaiah realized, watching the guards retreating back. Question is how deep? The siren wailed, signaling lockdown. Isaiah moved with the others, ribs screaming, but his resolve was steel. The vipers were bloodied, but Pierce was the real target. They think I'm prey, he thought, a cold fire burning in his gut. I'll hunt them all down. The labor block fell silent after the brawl, the air heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the faint groan of battered men limping away. Crates lay shattered across the concrete, their contents rusted bolts, broken tools scattered like the wreckage of a battlefield. Isaiah Ghost Coleman stood amid the chaos, chest heaving, the shard of metal slick with sweat in his grip. His ribs burned, his shoulder throbbed from the plank's glancing blow, but his eyes were steel fixed on the retreating iron vipers and the nameplate had spat out, Nathaniel Pierce. The oil tycoon's shadow loomed larger now, a puppet master pulling strings from beyond these walls. Javier Sparks Morales approached, wiping blood from a cut above his eye, his chain dangling loose in his hand. "You're a damn tornado, Ghost," he said, his voice rough but laced with grudging respect. "Blades running, scared. We held up yards ours if we keep this up." Isaiah nodded, his breath steadying, but his mind churned. He's not scared enough, he thought. Pierce won't stop. Hell, just send more dogs. Blade's confession was a start, but it wasn't enough, not yet. He needed the why, the how, the next move. Before he could respond, heavy boots thudded closer. Frank Reese, the guard who'd broken up the fight, stormed back into the block. His broad frame tense, baton still clutched tight. "Ghost, with me," Frank barked, his voice clipped, eyes darting to Sparks and the Lobos. "Now, we need to talk." Sparks raised an eyebrow, but Isaiah gave him a subtle nod, stand down, and followed Frank. The guard led him through a side passage, away from the main corridor, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a swarm of angry wasps. Isaiah's instincts flared. Frank's pace was too quick, his grip on the baton too tight. He's rattled, Ghost thought, sliding the shard into his sleeve, ready but unseen. More than he should be. Frank stopped in a cramped storage nook, a dead-end space piled with old mattresses and dented lockers. He turned, his dark eyes locking on Isaiah's, but there was no calm in them, only a storm of conflict. "You're digging a grave, Ghost," he said, his voice low and unsteady. "Blade, the vipers, this is bigger than you think." Isaiah stepped closer, his stance loose but primed, voice cold. "I know it's Pierce, Frank." Blade spilled it. "What I don't know is where you fit." Frank's hand twitched, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple despite the chill. "You don't get it," he muttered, glancing at the door like he expected it to burst open. "I owe you, Cobble. That IED, you pulled me out. But this," he drew a shaky breath, then pulled his service pistol from its holster, leveling it at Isaiah's chest. "I'm sorry, man. Pierce has my daughter." The words hit like a punch to the gut, sharper than any blow from the vipers. Isaiah froze, his eyes narrowing, but his voice stayed steady, cutting through the shock. "You're pointing that at the wrong guy, Frank. Put it down." Frank's hand trembled, the gun wavering, but he didn't lower it. "You don't think I tried?" he snapped, his voice cracking. "He's got Hermie little girl, Ellie. 2 days ago, they sent me a picture of her tied up, scared out of her mind. Said if I don't end you, she's dead. I can't lose her, Ghost." Isaiah's mind raced, the betrayal slicing deep, but he didn't flinch. Kabul, he thought, the memory flashing, Frank bleeding out, Isaiah dragging him to safety under fire. He was a brother then. Now he's Pierce's pawn. Anger flared, but so did clarity. Frank wasn't steady, wasn't locked in. The gun wasn't cocked, a telltale sign of hesitation. Has breaking, Ghost realized, his Delta training kicking in. "I can turn this." "You're better than this, Frank," Isaiah said, his tone low but firm, stepping forward despite the barrel aimed at him. "Pierce is playing, using her to make you his dog. You pull that trigger, you're not saving her. You're damning her." Frank's eyes widened, a flicker of doubt cutting through the panic. "Shut up," he shouted, the gun shaking harder. "You don't know. You don't have kids. I've got no choice." "You've got me," Isaiah countered, voice rising with controlled fury. "Put it down, and we get her back together. Pierce wants me dead because I'm close." Blades cracking, Taraz digging, he's scared Frank. "We can end this." For a moment, silence hung thick. The only sound Frank's ragged breathing and the distant clang of the prison. Then a shout echoed from the corridor. "Ghost!" Sparks' voice, sharp with alarm. Footsteps pounded closer, and Frank's head snapped toward the sound, his guard dropping for a split second. Isaiah moved fast, precise, like a shadow striking. He grabbed Frank's wrist, twisting it hard, the gun clattering to the floor. Frank swung a wild punch, but Ghost ducked, slamming him against the lockers with a metallic bang. "Stay down!" Isaiah growled, pinning him, the shard now at Frank's throat, not cutting, just pressing. "You're not my enemy. Pierce is." Frank slumped, resistance draining, his voice a broken whisper. "He's got Ellie Warehouse on 5th. That's all I know." Isaiah eased off, picking up the gun and tucking it into his waistband, his chest tight with adrenaline and betrayal. "Then we're getting her," he said, voice iron. "You're with me now. Frank, no more games." Sparks burst in, chain in hand, eyes darting between them. "What the hell's this?" he demanded, glaring at Frank. "Change of plans," Isaiah said, his gaze locked on Frank's defeated form. "Pierce has his kid in terrace next if we don't move fast." Inside, Ghostmind roared, the pieces snapping together. "Pierce isn't just cleaning me out," he thought, fury and focus melding. His wiping the board, Frank's girl, Tara, anyone who's a thread. Frank's betrayal cut deep, but the hesitation, the uncocked gunnet was a crack he'd exploited. "Has not lost yet," Isaiah decided, and neither am I. Sparks nodded, grim but ready. "Lobos are in. Let's hit 'em." Isaiah pulled Frank up, his voice a low command. "You're driving, Frank. Take us to that warehouse now." The guard nodded, guilt and desperation etched into his face, and they moved out, the shard and gun heavy with purpose. Pierce had overplayed his hand. Ghost was coming, and hell was riding with him. The night outside the prison was a shroud of black, the Midwest wind howling through the empty streets as Isaiah Ghost Coleman crouched in the back of a rusted maintenance van. Frank Reese gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, eyes hollow with guilt and fear. The pistol Isaiah had taken from him sat heavy in his waistband, the shard of metal a cold weight in his sleeve, two tools for a war he'd been forced into. Javier Sparks Morales sat beside him, chain coiled in his lap, his sharp gaze fixed on the road ahead. The warehouse on 5th Street loomed in their path, a hulking shadow of corrugated steel, where Pierce's men held Frank's daughter, and, if Isaiah's gut was right, Tara too. 5 minutes out, Frank muttered, his voice tight, barely audible over the engine's rumble. "They've got Ellie in there. I saw the photo. Back room tied up." Isaiah's jaw clenched, his mind a steel trap honing every detail. Pierce is tying loose ends, he thought, the betrayal from the labor block still raw. Frank's kid, Tara Thayer, bait to keep me running. He's betting I'll break. He wouldn't. Delta Force had forged him in fire missions where one wrong step meant death, and this was just another battlefield. We get in, get them out, then Pierce pays, he decided, his resolve a blade sharpened by rage. "Plan?" Sparks asked, his tone clipped. "Ready." "Fast and quiet," Isaiah said, voice low and firm. "Frank, you get us through the gate, to's your badge. Sparks, you and me hit the back. 2 guards, maybe 3. Pierce has hired muscle, not vipers. We take 'em down, grab the girls, and bolt." Frank nodded, sweat beading on his brow. "Gates manned. I can talk us and say it's a supply run. After that, you're on your own." "Not alone," Sparks corrected, hefting the chain. "Lobos don't back off a fight." The van rolled up to the warehouse gate, a chain-link barrier under a flickering floodlight. A guard in a dark jacket stepped out, hand on a holstered gun, peering at Frank. "Reese, what's this?" "Late drop-off," Frank said, forcing calm into his voice, flashing his prison ID. "Tools for the crew. Open it." The guard hesitated, then shrugged, hitting a button. The gate rattled open and Frank drove through, parking near a side entrance shrouded in darkness. Isaiah slipped out first, Sparks behind him, their boots silent on the gravel. The back door was steel, locked, but a small window beside it hung loose, careless. Ghost pried it open with the shard, climbing through into a cavernous space lit by dim overheads. Inside, the warehouse smelled of oil and damp concrete, crates stacked high, shadows stretching long. Voices echoed, low grunt, a muffled sob. Isaiah signaled Sparks, creeping toward the sound, his senses razor sharp. Two guards stood near a back room, one leaning on a crate, the other pacing with a pistol in hand. No vipers, just hired thugs, sloppy and overconfident. Sparks moved first, chain whipping out to wrap the pacer's ankle, yanking him down with a startled yell. Isaiah lunged at the second, slamming the shard's blunt end into the man's temple before he could draw. The guard crumpled, out cold, and Sparks silenced the first with a swift kick to the jaw. "Smooth," Sparks whispered, uncoiling the chain. Isaiah pushed the backroom door open, heart pounding but hands steady. Inside, Ellie Reese, a girl no older than 10, sat tied to a chair, her small frame trembling. Duct tape over her mouth. Beside her, Tara Evans slumped, wrists bound, a bruise blooming on her cheek. Her eyes widened at Isaiah, relief and fear warring in them. "Ghost," she rasped, voice hoarse. "They knew I was close. Pierce's men grabbed me this morning." Isaiah cut Ellie's ropes with the shard, peeling the tape off gently as she whimpered. "You're safe now," he said, soft but firm, handing her to Sparks. He freed Tara next, her grip shaky but fierce when she grabbed his arm. "His cleaning house," she said. "You, me, or anyone who can nail him." "His mistake," Isaiah growled, helping her up. "Has not cleaning, he's burning." A shout rang out, Frank's voice, panicked, from the front. "They're coming!" Headlights flashed through the warehouse windows, tires screeching on gravel. Pierce's back up more muscle, armed heavier than the guards they dropped. "Out now," Isaiah ordered, shoving Tara and Ellie toward the side exit. Sparks took point, chain ready, as gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets pinged off crates, splintering wood, but Ghost kept moving, shielding Ellie with his body. Pierce wants a war, he thought, fury blazing. He'll bring it to his doorstep. They burst into the night, Frank's van idling where they'd left it. Sparks hauled Ellie inside, Tara scrambling after, as Isaiah spun to face the pursuers' 3 men, handguns blazing. He dove behind the van, pulling Frank's pistol and firing 2 precise shots. One hit a thug's leg, dropping him. The other grazed a shoulder, slowing the second. "Go," he shouted, slamming the door as Frank floored it, tires spinning gravel into the dark. The warehouse shrank in the rear view, gunfire fading, but Isaiah's pulse thundered. "They're alive," he thought, glancing at Ellie's tear-streaked face in Tara's grim determination. "But Pierce isn't done, and neither am I." Sirens screamed closer, their wails bouncing off the warehouse walls as Isaiah Ghost Coleman stood over Nathaniel Pierce. The tycoon's blood stained the concrete, his wounded shoulder trembling, but his eyes still burned with defiance. Tara clutched Ellie close, shielding the girl's face from the chaos, while Sparks kept watch, chain dangling from his hand like a promise of violence. The recording on Tara's phone looped Pierce's damning words. "I own this city," a noose tightening around his neck. But Ghost knew better than to relax. Pierce wasn't a man who surrendered. He was a snake, coiled and waiting. "Frank's almost here," Tara said, her voice steady despite the bruises blooming on her skin. "Cops too." "We've got him!" "Isaiah?" Ghost didn't turn, his gaze locked on Pierce. "Not yet. He's got one more card, always does." His mind churned, replaying every encounter with the man. He's too calm, has stalling. Pierce coughed, a wet, mocking sound, then grinned through the pain. "You're sharp, Coleman. Shame you picked the wrong side." His good hand twitched toward his sleeve, subtle but deliberate. Isaiah lunged, pinning Pierce's arm before he could draw whatever was hidden a blade. A remote didn't matter. "Game's up," Ghost growled, twisting until Pierce hissed in agony. But the tycoon's smirk didn't fade, and a low rumble shook the warehouse floor, distant, then deafening. An explosion erupted outside, the shockwave rattling the skylights, glass shards raining down. "Ambush!" Sparks shouted, diving to cover Ellie and Tara as gunfire erupted from the shadows. Black-clad mercenaries poured in through the shattered entrance, automatic weapons blazing. Pierce's last stand as private army, bought with dirty money, loyal to the end. Ghost rolled behind a crate, dragging Pierce with him as bullets tore through the air. "You planned this," he snarled, slamming Pierce against the wood. "Your exit strategy." Pierce laughed, blood flecking his lips. "You think I'd let you walk away? My men will bury you here, cops, or no cops." Isaiah's jaw tightened, his mind a storm of tactics. Outnumbered, outgunned, but not outsmarted, he scanned the warehouse oil slick from the forklift crash, barrels scattered, the vent shaft still open above. We turn his trap against him. "Sparks!" Ghost yelled, tossing Frank's pistol to his partner. "Light it up!" Sparks caught this gun, understanding flashing in his eyes. He fired at the spilled oil, igniting it with a whoosh that sent flames racing across the floor. The mercenaries faltered, their formation breaking as heat and smoke choked the air. Isaiah hauled Pierce up, using him as a shield, and sprinted toward Tara and Ellie. "Move a vent shaft, now!" Tara scooped Ellie into her arms, climbing a stack of crates to reach the vent, Sparks covering their ascent with precise shots. Ghost shoved Pierce ahead, forcing the tycoon to stumble through the case. Chaos. His pristine suit now smeared with soot and blood. Bullets whizzed past, one grazing Isaiah's arm, but he didn't flinch. Pain was fuel now, not a distraction. They reached the vent, Tara and Ellie already inside, Sparks sliding in after. Isaiah turned, Pierce still in his grip, and faced the inferno below. The mercenaries regrouped, their leader a hulking figure in tactical gear barking orders. "Kill them all!" he roared, voice cutting through the crackle of flames. Ghost met Pierce's gaze, cold and unyielding. "Your empire's burning. Call them off, or you go down with it." Pierce spat blood, his arrogance fraying. "You're bluffing. You need me alive evidence." Isaiah pressed the shard to Pierce's throat, just enough to draw a thin red line. "I've got the recording. You're optional." His voice was ice, every word a promise. "Last chance." Pierce's eyes flickered, calculating. Then he shouted, "Stand down, now!" The mercenaries hesitated, their leader snarling but lowering his weapon. The fire spread, licking at the walls, forcing them back. Ghost didn't wait. He shoved Pierce into the vent, crawling after him, the tight space amplifying the tycoon's ragged breathing. They emerged on the roof, smoke billowing behind, the night air sharp and cold. Frank's van screeched to a halt below, cops swarming the perimeter too late for Pierce's men, but just in time for justice. Isaiah stood, Pierce at his feet, the city skyline sprawling beyond. Tara hugged Ellie tight, tears of relief in her eyes, while Sparks grinned, chain coiled over his shoulder. "Hell of a night, Ghost." Ghost looked down at Pierce, the man who'd terrorized so many, now broken and small. "It's over," he said, voice quiet but final. "Justice doesn't bend." Police lights flashed, officers climbing the fire escape, cuffs ready. Pierce glared up, defeated but venomous. "You'll pay for this, Coleman. Someday." Isaiah didn't blink. Maybe, but not today. He turned away as the cops took Pierce, his silhouette unyielding against the flames, a shadow that wouldn't fade. The rooftop of the burning warehouse was a jagged island in the night, the Midwest wind cutting through the smoke as police lights flashed below. Isaiah Ghost Coleman stood at the edge, his silhouette stark against the flames. The shard of metal still clenched in his fist, now dulled from combat, a relic of the prison he'd turned into a weapon. Nathaniel Pierce sat cuffed between two officers, his wounded shoulder seeping blood, his once arrogant glare reduced to a flicker of impotent rage. The tycoon's empire had collapsed in the chaos, his mercenaries hauled away, his confession recorded, his power snuffed out like a candle in a storm. Tara Evans knelt beside Ellie Reese, wrapping the trembling girl in her jacket, her bruised face softened by relief. "She's okay," Tara said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing her down. "Frank's coming up hell, take her home." Isaiah nodded, his eyes drifting to Javier Sparks Morales, who leaned against a vent, chain coiled over his shoulder, a faint grin breaking through his battered features. "You're a damn force, Ghost," Sparks said, wiping soot from his brow. "Vipers are history. Pierce, too. Hell of a win." "Team effort," Isaiah replied, his tone low but firm, though his gaze lingered on the horizon. "But it's not over till he's locked up for good." Frank Reese climbed it onto the roof, his guard uniform torn, his broad frame shaking as he rushed to Ellie. He dropped to his knees, pulling her into a fierce hug, tears streaking his dirt-smudged face. "I'm here, baby," he choked out. "I'm never letting you go again." Ellie clung to him, her sobs muffled against his chest, a father redeemed in her arms. Ghost watched, the shard's weight grounding him as his mind wrestled with Frank's arc. He sold me out, he thought, the memory of the uncocked gun and the labor block flashing sharp. But he broke for her, risked it all to fix it. Forgiveness didn't come easy. Delta had taught him trust was a rare currency, but Frank's choice here now tipped the scales. He's not clean, Isaiah decided, but he's not Pierce's anymore. Tara stood, brushing hair from her face, and stepped to Ghost's side. The DA's got the recording, she said, her voice firm with purpose. Pierce's confession, the bank records I dug up, the frame job, it's airtight. He's looking at decades. No buying his way out this time. Good, Isaiah said, slipping the shard into his pocket. It's roll finished. Nail him to the wall, Tara. Every charge, every life he ruined. Don't let him slither free. She met his eyes, a spark of steel matching his own. I won't. This is for you, for all of us. Below, Pierce was shoved into a squad car, his final snarl lost in the slam of the door. The Iron Vipers were done, blades crew fractured, their reign in the prison ashes with Pierce's fall. Ghost's frame job unraveled with the evidence Tara held, his freedom within reach. But as the cops cleared out, he felt no lightness, only a weight, a clarity forged in blood and fire. Frank approached, Ellie still in his arms, his voice rough with gratitude and guilt. Ghost who can't undo what I did. That gun, I'd take it back if I could. Isaiah held his gaze, unflinching. You don't get a pass, Frank, he said, his tone hard but measured. You chose her over Pierce Good. Prove it every day. She's your second chance, not me. Frank nodded, swallowing hard. I will. For her, for you. Sparks clapped Ghost on the back, breaking the tension. You're out soon, man. Lobos owe you. Call us if the world gets messy again. Count on it, Isaiah said, a rare half-smile flickering. Keep that chain sharp. The rooftop emptied as dawn crept over the skyline, painting the city in soft gold. Tara stood with Ghost, the wind tugging at them, a quiet settling in. What's next, she asked, her voice softer now, searching. He pulled his dog tags free, running his thumb over the etched steel, a tether to the soldier he'd been, and the man had become. We rebuild, he said, his voice steady, resolute. Pierce took my life, locked me up, thought he'd bury me. I took it back, step by step, blow by blow. But there's more out there, more like him, crushing people for power. We don't stop fighting. Together, Tara pressed, her hand brushing his arm. Together, there he confirmed, gripping the tags tight. For the ones who can't. He stepped to the roof's edge, the city sprawling below a battlefield he'd conquered, a promise he'd keep. Inside, his soul settled, the fury of the night hardening into purpose. I didn't just survive, he thought, every scar a testament, every fight a forge. I carved justice from their ruins. Pierce thought he could break me. He didn't know it'd break the world first. The sun rose, casting his shadow long and unyielding. A ghost no cage could hold, a force no darkness could claim. He'd fought for his freedom, for Ellie's life, for Tara's truth, and he'd fight again. Justice wasn't a gift, it was a fire you kindled, a blade you wielded, a stand you took when the world tried to grind you down. Pierce is gone, he said aloud, voice a quiet thunder as Tara stood beside him. But the war's ours now to right the wrongs, to burn the shadows clean. And with that, Isaiah Ghost Coleman walked into the dawn, not just a survivor, but a reckoning.